Hi everyone and welcome back to Be Like Christ. In today's video, a comparison between Job and Ezekiel. Job and Ezekiel are both rather large books in the Old Testament. And if I had to take a bet, I would bet that you know more about Job than you do about Ezekiel. Ezekiel's kind of hard. But today I want to look at how these books relate to our obedience to God. Let's look at the book of Job first. Job has around 40 chapters, and the gist of the story of Job is that God meets with Satan, unbeknownst to Job, and they make an agreement. In this agreement, Satan is allowed to tempt Job, and God expects Job to be obedient to him through this temptation. But Job really has some questions because he doesn't know why all of this is happening to him or why he's allowed to suffer the way that he's suffering. So the entire book is kind of a discussion of, well, what did you do wrong, Job, to deserve this? And Job's asking God, what did I do wrong? Why is all this stuff allowed to happen to me? And he even begins to question God a little bit. Ezekiel's life is very different, though. When God gives Ezekiel a command, he never questions why he's being asked to suffer. It's really interesting because you read Ezekiel and God tells Ezekiel to do all kinds of crazy things. First of all, he was a prophet to the people in Babylon and nobody liked him because he brought all these messages of doom and despair on the Israelites because they had been wicked and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, was going to go destroy their city. So he wasn't the most popular guy in town. In addition to that, God asked to lay on his side, his left side and then his right side for almost a year. And all he was allowed to eat was this bread mixture that he was able to cook on cow's poop. Now, if I was Ezekiel, I might say, Lord, why do I have to do this? There's a lot of other stuff I'd rather be doing than being obedient to you in this terrible job you've given me. Him laying on his side was actually a representation of the punishment of the children of Israel. Later on, God comes to Ezekiel and he says, Ezekiel, your wife's going to die. But you're not allowed to mourn or you're not allowed to cry over the death of your wife. And the reason I'm going to do this is because this is going to be a symbol to the people of the destruction of what they love the most, Jerusalem and the temple. And Ezekiel just says, yes, Lord. He never questions, he never complains, he never argues with God. It's just, yes, Lord, I'll do what you tell me. I think the reason Ezekiel never questions is actually because of what we read in chapter 1. If you've ever tried to study the book of Ezekiel, you get to chapter 1, you open it up, and you're like, whoa, I have no idea what's going on here. In Ezekiel 1, the glory of the Lord, this vision of God and angels and wheels and all this other stuff appears to Ezekiel, and this is like his calling to be a prophet. He gets one of the greatest visions of God that I think any human being has ever seen. And I think it's because he has an appreciation for how big, how majestic, how glorious this God really is that he doesn't ever question what God tells him to do, even though sometimes it's not any fun. Job comes to a point where he doesn't question God anymore either. But it's not in the first chapter like it is in Ezekiel. It's actually in one of the chapters towards the end of the book when God appears to him and God starts to ask him questions. Where were you when I formed the foundations of the earth? Where were you when I set the sea in its boundaries? Where were you when I did all this glorious stuff? And God's conclusion really is to Job, you're not in a position to question me. And through this kind of questioning that God lays on him, Job sees the greatness and the glory of God, and he doesn't question him anymore. When we think about our own lives, we probably are more in a situation of Job than we are in Ezekiel. Sometimes God asks us to do things or to keep certain commands that are in the Bible or to act this way towards our enemies, and we say, why should I do that? It might not be the most enjoyable thing to do. The difference between Ezekiel and Job is that Ezekiel got to see God from the very beginning. And the life that he lived after that was the correct response to seeing something that magnificent. And I want to encourage you to be like Ezekiel, to look into this book and to see how great and how glorious and how powerful and how amazing the God that we serve is. See that from a young age and then live your life in the light of his glory. There may be some things that he says that don't make sense to us. There may be some things that we would kind of rather change than follow. But remember that if we could see the God that we serve, none of us would ever question what he told us to do. And keep this in mind as well. There is going to be a day when every single person on the earth will stand before God. And what the Bible tells us is that on that day, there will be no one who questions him. There won't be anybody who wants to argue with God about the things that he told us to do, because we'll be so overwhelmed with his glory that the scriptures tell us that every knee will bow to him. So don't wait until it's too late to recognize the greatness of God. Recognize it now. If you've never become a Christian, do that and be obedient to what this Creator tells you to do. If you are a Christian, live a life that is fully devoted and unquestionably faithful to the greatest being in the cosmos. In 1 Opinions, chapter 1, verse 15, it says, "Thou shalt like, comment, and subscribe to 2BeLikeChrist or be punished severely."